Okay, we are on Kuf Vav Amid Beis, the bottom of the Amid. Amirav. A person is able to wash his hands in the morning. Let's say he goes to the bathroom and he washes his hands. And he could stipulate that this should work for all the meals, as long as he's makbid to make sure that his hands stay clean and stay pure. He could wash them once in the morning, and that could work for all the meals of the day. It's a tremendous chiddush. Now it sounds like this could be done even l'chachila. So the Gemara discusses Amrav Avina livnei pakta da'aravis. Rav Avina said to the people of Pakta Aravis, apparently this place did not have a lot of water. It was a scarce. He says, in your location where there's not a lot of water, this is what you should do. Wash your hands once in the morning, stipulate the whole day, and just make sure your hands are clean. So the Gemara wants to know, was he dafka saying, there's two options of what he meant. Either he was saying it's dafka because water is scarce that you're allowed to do this, but in general it's not to be done l'chachila. Or no, it's generally mutter l'chachila. For you should do it. Meaning, it's normally an option. L'chachila you could do it, it's an option. But for you, it's we're advising you to take that option. So some say that he was saying that you should only do it b'shasat chak. Upligi the Rav, and he does not agree with Rav, because Rav started off today's daf by saying that it's even shloi b'shasat chak, and he's saying no, only in an area where water is scarce. V'igad and some say no, I feel shloi b'shasat chak nami. The truth is, Rav Avina agrees that it's mutter even shloi b'shasat chak like Rav. So why was he saying that the water is scarce? He was saying that because the water is scarce, therefore it's not just an option. I'm advising you to do it. But in general, every person could do it optionally. It's not a problem. Okay. Amra Papa Hayarisa de Daloi. Okay, so they would have let's say a canal or a river, let's say a canal. They would take water from the canal and pour it into ditches. And then in the ditches it would just naturally just flow lazily. So the halacha is you are not allowed to dip your hands into the ditch for Tvilas Yadayim. You're not allowed to put your hands in the ditch. Now the reason why is because putting your hands in the ditch, it's like this. If you're putting it into a natural spring of water, then it for sure works because then it has 40 sa. This did not have 40 sa. So you'll say, okay, so you're going to put your hands in, so how is it worse than just Natilas Yadayim from a cup? The difference is Natilas Yadayim, the water is moving with koyach gavra. It's moving due to the force of a human. This, the initial pour was from a human, but then it's just naturally just flowing with gravity. And therefore it loses koyach gavra. So it's not kosher mikveh, and therefore you're trying to make it work really in the fundamentals of Natilas Yadayim, and it doesn't have koyach gavra. The Gemara says, but if you put your hands near the area where the person is splashing the water in, right, that initial, force of the bucket, let's say, moves it 5 feet. So if you put your hands within 5 feet, then it is koyach gavra. Now an interesting halacha. So you have the canal. They would take a bucket and pour it into the ditch. Now the issue is that the ditch did not have 40 sa. If it had 40 sa, you could put your hand in. You don't need koyach gavra. It didn't have 40 sa. Therefore, it was trying to work mitzad Natilas Yadayim by dipping it in from the fundamentals of Natilas Yadayim, and it doesn't have koyach gavra. But let me say it outside. If the bucket that you're using to take from the canal to the ditch has a hole in it, the size of a gourd, I think it's the size of a gourd. I think it has to be a size of how big is the hole? I'm sorry. It doesn't have to be the size of a gourd. It has to be a hole so much that water would fill the bucket. Okay, so let's say a 2-inch hole, whatever it is. So you have the canal and the ditch. If the bucket, as you're taking the water from the canal and pouring into the ditch, there's a hole that's streaming water down. So in essence, what it looks like this: you have ditch, and then canal, and in between you have a bucket where the bucket is pouring water into the ditch, but it has water streaming out of it back into the canal. The halacha is that is mechaber. It combines everything together. Then you could dip your hands into the ditch. The reason being is because it's connected at that moment to the canal through the water in the bucket. That nitzuk is mechaber all of it. Therefore, it's as if it has 40 sa, and you could put your hands in. Okay, v'amarava klisha nikiv b'koines mashka. Let's say you have a cup. It's not a cup, and the cup is a hole big enough that water would fill the cup. If you put the cup into water, the cup would fill. That cup, is possible for netilas yadayim. And once you have a hole of that size, it loses its shem kli. V'amarava, kli shem b'revius. A vessel that does not hold a revius, it's a shot glass, whatever, it's too small. It's not kosher because you need a revius for netilas yadayim. Do you need a revius for netilas yadayim? V'amarava, didn't Rabbi say kli shein machzik revius ein nobnei yadayim? Ha machzik avagav de leslei. Didn't Rabbi say that the issue is that a kli has to be able to hold a revius, but implying if the kli is big enough, it doesn't have to have a revius. So the question is, do you need a revius by netilas yadayim? One statement of Rabbi implies yes, because he says that it has to be able to hold a revius, which implies a revius is necessary. But another time, he says as long as it's big enough, implying even if it doesn't have a revius. So do you need a revius or not? So the Gemara says, like kasha, halachad halatrei. The answer is it depends how many people are washing with that cup. If one person is washing, you need a revius. If two people are washing, you could start with a revius, pour it on the first person's hands, and then pour the remainder onto the second person's hands. And because it started with a revius, that's enough. Yeah, meaning since the less than the revius for the second person came from a full revius, that's enough. So if you just fill it up less than revius, it's no good. But if you fill up a revius, pour for one, and then use the remainder to pour for a second, it's kosher for the second because at least it stemmed from a glass that had a revius in it. Okay, how we pass, I'm not sure, but I don't think we pass this way. The Gemara says, "D'tanan may revius noitzim in nidayim leechad." A revius is needed for one person, but one revius suffices for two, even though by the time you get to the second person, it's less than a revius, but because it stemmed from a cleave that had a revius in it. So you need at least to have a revius in the beginning. Once you have a revius, you can use that revius for multiple people. Amrle Rav Sheshes Lameimar, Rav Sheshes once said to Lameimar, Kabdina Amona, are you makbid that it has to have the status of a kli for netilas yadayim? Amrle in, yes. Achazusa, are you makbid that has to look like water? It can't be red, whatever. Amrle in, yes. Ashiura, are you makbid that has a revius? Amrle in, okay. But Igada Amri, some have a different version. The Hachi Amrle, Amona v'Achazusa Kabdina, Ashiura loy Kabdina. Some have a different version. That Lameimar said to Rav Sheshes, you don't need a revius. The Tanan may revius night because the Mishnah says one revius can work for two people, so evidently a revius is not required. Now this is not exactly what we said before. We said before, and the Gemara is going to point this out. We said before that one revius can work for two people. Not that you don't need a revius, because it started with a revius. But had you just filled in a half a revius, it wouldn't work. Rav Sheish Ameimer is now saying evidently you don't even need a revius. You could start with half a revius. But the Gemara says loihi, it's not true. Ameimer's inference is not correct. You don't see from this Mishnah you don't need a revius. What you see from this Mishnah is that if you started with a revius, you could finish on the second person even without a revius. But you can't start without a revius. Okay. The Gemara says, Iskin Rav Yaakov ben Arpagod natla bas reviusa. Rav Yaakov ben Arpagod made a glass that had the revius, that way people knew the proper shear. Similarly, Iskin Rav Ashi b'Hutzel kuza bas reviusa. He also made in Hutzel, he made a standard cup, earthenware cup to hold a revius. Now, one of the rules, I'll explain the Gemara, it's the Rishonim, I'm going to go with the Mahalach that I was understanding a little bit better. What you need for a Kli is that it has to have the status of a Kli, which means it has to be manufactured or made in order to hold water. And it has to be able to practically hold water, meaning let's say you have a cup. You know, like those paper cups, those Dixie cups, but they come to a triangle? So that's not kosher for a Kli. Why? For netilas yadayim. The reason being is because while it's technically made as a cup, it can't stand on its own. It'll top over. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Megufas chavish shetikna. If you have the cover of a cask, so apparently according to some Rishonim, the cover of the cask is not just meant to close the cask, it's actually with a little bit of an arch that actually is meant to hold liquid, but it's like a little bit like a saucer, it's like a little bit like a dreidel, it won't stand. But if you fashion it in such a way, you make a base for it, whatever, then now it could stand. No, it's a nidayim, and it's kosher for netilas yadayim because you made it in a way that it can now stand. Tanya mihachi, similar Brisa says, Meguvas chavish shetiknon nidayim. Chemas uchvisha shetiknon. A chemas or a kfisha. Chemas and kfisha are different types of. They're bottles made out of like animal skin, like snake skin, whatever. Noid nidayim. They could be used because they're made for netilas yadayim. Now, again, the issue with them is that they can't stand upright, but if you make them in a way that they could stand upright, then it's kosher. But sak v'kupa, but a sack or a wicker basket, which is not made for holding liquid, even if these happen to be able to hold liquid. One of them falls into tar, so whatever. But it's not made to be able to hold liquid. Even though they practically can hold water, they're not kosher for netilas yadayim because they're not meant. They're not made for netilas yadayim. They're not made for water. I have a question. So we know you're supposed to wash your hands for netilas yadayim for bread. The question is, ma'u lechel b'mapa. Let's say, I'm not sure, I know we paskin this way that you could do this if there's no water available. But let's say, it doesn't say whether there's water or not. A person doesn't want to wash his hands. He wants to wrap the bread in cloth. Wrap the bread in a bag, in some sort of bag, so he doesn't touch the bread. Is that a problem? The whole issue is that the bread will touch your hands. Do we trust a person basically to wrap the bread in a way that he won't touch it? Do we trust the person that he won't touch it or not? So Tashema, the Mishnah says, now this Mishnah is a shailin. It has to do with the Maseches Sukkah. It has to do with whether you could eat a snack outside of the Sukkah. The Mishnah begins by quoting Rav Yechim and Zakkai and Rav Gamliel, who were machmer on themselves that they didn't even eat a snack outside of the sukkah. But then the Mishnah says, Rav Tzaddik felt that you're allowed to eat less than a kabeh outside of the sukkah, and when they gave him less than a bayas of bread outside of the sukkah, noitla b'mapa, he took it in a cloth, and he ate it outside of the sukkah. Notice how he took it in a cloth, okay. The aim of Arach Achrav, and he didn't bench, because of Tzaddik Paskin that you only bench on a Kabeya, we Paskin that you bench on a Kazai, it's fine. My lav, now over here, he didn't eat a Kabeya's worth. So the truth is, a Kabeya's worth does not require netilas yadayim. The question is, ha-Kabeya, the implication is that he only did this wrapping method because it was less than a Kabeya, but if it was a Beya, that's the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says that he would eat a less than a Beya's worth outside of the Sukkah wrapped, implying that if it was a Beya, he wouldn't wrap it, he would wash. So you see that wrapping is not an option. So the Gemara says, Lav Dafka. The implication is the Mishnah is teaching a lot of halachas. It's teaching you, but the ikar point of the Mishnah is to tell you that he would eat a snack outside of the Sukkah. So it says that if it was less than a Beya wrapped, he would eat outside of the Sukkah. Don't be medayik that if it was a Beya, he wouldn't wrap his hands. Maybe if it was a Beya, he would go inside the Sukkah. Maybe he would continue eating it wrapped. And it only mentions less than a Beya because if it was a Beya, he wouldn't eat outside of the Sukkah. Dilma hakabeh by sukkah by bracha. So it's lav dafka that yes, the Mishnah is definitely implying that there's a difference between less than a beya and more than a beya. But don't be medayik that less than a beya, the ikar is he wouldn't wrap the bread. More than a beya, less than a beya he would wrap the bread. More than a beya he wouldn't wrap the bread. He would wash his hands. I don't know. Maybe he would still wrap the bread and he would trust himself if he didn't want to wash the netilas yadayim. But rather, maybe if it was a beya, he would go to the sukkah. It's lav dafka. So Tashema. Shmuel found Rav eating bread with his hands wrapped in a cloth. I think it's a shaila in Tzitz Eliezer whether you have to wrap the bread or wrap the hands. I think you have to machmer both. So the point is, Shmuel found Rav that it was wrapped. Amar lei, Shmuel said to Rav, go to the next page, Avdin Kadein, this is what you're following, that you didn't wash your hands? Meaning, who eats bread without washing? Amar lei, daiti kitzaralai, no, I wash my hands. Rav didn't want to get his hands dirty. Rav was very particular. It was a sandwich, meaning he didn't wash his hands. But he still wrapped the bread and wrapped his hands because he didn't want the hands to get dirty. Daiti Katsara means that he was finick, istinus. He didn't like the hands to get messy. It's like eating pizza with a fork and a knife. He didn't, So it's lav dafka. It doesn't mean that he didn't. He taka did, but he taka did wrap his hands, wash his hands, but he still was makbid not to, But it wasn't. Don't be medayik from here that he would taka wrap his hands instead of netilas yadayim. It was an addition. Kisalek Rav Zera, when Rav Zera went to Eretz Yisrael, eshkechil Ravami Ravasi dekachi bebeloy cham masois. He saw that Ravami Ravasi wrapped their hands with worn out bottles, skin bottles, whatever it is. Basically, they wrapped their hands or wrapped the bread, whatever, and they ate without netilas yadayim. But they taka did it. There was an addition. Omar, he said, Trey Gaver Rav Kavasayu, you two great Rabbanim litu, but the Rav Shmuel, you made a mistake in the story of Rav Shmuel. Hadaiti Ktsaraka Omar. Meaning, he thought Rav and Ravasi were doing this because they heard that Rav wrapped his hands without washing. He said, it's not the Maisa. We just explained the Maisa. The Maisa, that was in addition to washing your hands. He made a mistake based on a Maisa. You misunderstood the Maisa. So the Gemara says, the truth is, there is a defense for Rav Ravasi. Ishtamitze hada Amar Rav Tachlifa Baravimi Amar Shmuel, Hetiru Mapa Loichle Truma. The The answer is a very interesting thing. Although Netilas Yadayim was instituted for Kehanim, but it's Dafka Kehanim who can get away without doing Netilas Yadayim by wrapping their hands. Meaning, the issue with wrapping your hands is that we don't trust you that you won't accidentally touch the bread. Dafka Kehanim, who are vigilant enough to be able to eat Truma, like Rav Ami Ravasi, not someone who's Oichle Taharis, which is someone who eats Chullin, al das, treating it severe, treating it kaddish. Talking to someone who actually eats truma, like Rav Ami Ravasi or Kehanim actually ate truma. It's a shayla. They actually ate or not. The point is, Rav Ami Ravasi or Kehanim who are right to eat truma, they can eat wrapped. So it's lav dafka that you could apply it to other people. It's dafka Rav Ami Ravasi because they were that vigilant. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to have a discussion. And it's going to be twofold. What if Ruvain is feeding Shimon? He's putting bread into Shimon's mouth. So the question is, does anyone have to do Netilas Yadayim? So let's first analyze Shimon, the one who's eating, and then the feeder. So Ibailahu Oichel Machmas Machel, one who is eating because someone else is feeding him. Tzarich Netilas Yadayim Eloi. Does the eater have to wash Netilas Yadayim? The question is basically, are we concerned that he'll accidentally touch the bread himself, or when the guy is done, he'll grab a piece because he already is in the mode of eating, or no? If I'm being fed, I don't have to wash my hands. Now we have not discussed whether the feeder has to. We're just talking about the eater, not the feeder. That's annoying. The one who's eating as opposed to the one who's feeding the other person. Tashema, Rav Huna bar Schayra have a koi kamei Rav Hamnuna. Rav Huna bar Schayra was by Rav Hamnuna. I don't know why. Maybe Rav Hamnuna was older or sick, whatever it was. Rav Huna was feeding him. So kolim le umtza, he took a piece of roasted meat in bread and basically put a sandwich in his mouth. And Rav Hamnuna was eating it. So Amar Le, and the question is, did Rav Hamnuna wash his hands? So Amar Le, well, let's analyze. What did Rav Huna say to him? He says, "Ilav Rav Huna at lo yisafinu lach." If you weren't Rav Hamnuna, who's very vigilant, I would not be doing this. So what does that mean? Pashas, it means you didn't wash your hands. I don't normally believe that a person who's being fed doesn't have to wash your hands. You in particular, I trust you not to touch it. But normally I wouldn't do this. So my time, so you see that if you're careful, right? Meaning he's saying, I trust you because you're Rav Hamnuna. Why? Because he's saying, I trust you not to touch your bread. So you see that the one who's being fed, the one who's eating, if he's taka vigilant, he doesn't have to wash his hands. So the Gemara says, it's actually funny. I was thinking the same thing. I see they bring down at the bottom of the article that Ritzvah asked the exact opposite. That the diak from the Gemara should be that it's Dafka Rav Hamnuna who doesn't have to. But I guess the point is, you see from Rav Hamnuna that it's a possibility that if you're someone who's vigilant on the level of Rav Hamnuna, you do not have to wash your hands. So you see that the Netilas Yadayim is not enacted by someone being fed. So the Gemara says, "Loi, no. Really, if Rav Hamnuna did wash his hands, so what does it mean if you weren't Rav Hamnuna? What it means is like this: the average person wouldn't wash their hands first. It's dafka you who knows the halacha that you wash your hands first. Loi, dezar is kadam mashi yadem ikara. What it means is like this: you do have to wash your hands. He was just saying that if you weren't Rav Hamnuna, everyone else, if I would feed them, they would not know the halacha, and they would would not wash their hands. I dafka you because I trust that you did the halacha properly by washing the hands first. That I'm doing this. You do have to wash. Tashema dam Rab Zera Amarav liitan adam prusel piv shel shamish. You're not allowed to put a piece of bread into the shamish's mouth. Elam ken yedeh, but not unless he washes his hands first. Stop. Now we are going to finish this teaching of Rav, but you see very clearly that you're not allowed to feed a waiter at a table. The basic case is you have bread at the table. You're going to give some of your bread from the meal to the waiter to put it in his mouth. The halach is you can't do that unless you wash his hands first. So you see that you have to wash your hands when you're being fed. The Gemara though will point this out later on that maybe a waiter is not a raya because he's so busy. But okay, but let's just finish the teaching. Then Rav said, Hashamish mevarch al kol kais v'kais. Every time a waiter gets wine during the meal, he has to make a new bracha. The reason being is because you make a new bracha on every cup if you don't expect to get another cup. He doesn't know whether people are going to offer him and be generous and offer their wine to him. So every single time a guy offers, he has to make another bracha because it's not like he intended. He didn't know. But he doesn't have to make another bracha on each piece of bread because he knows people will feed him bread. It's the right thing to do, at least give him bread. Wine is a luxury, but you should feed him bread as he's working. Rabbi Yechon Amar Mevarach al kol prusa prusa. Rabbi Yechon says no. Every time he disagrees, seemingly, and he says no. A waiter has to make a bracha on each piece of bread because how does he know that he's going to be fed bread? Now the Gemara points this out. The Gemara says this machlokas, whether Rav and Rav Yochanan, whether he has to make a bracha on each slice of bread, is lav dafka, it's a machlokas. It could be, it just depends who's eating there. If a Talmud Chacham is eating the meal, he knows that the Talmud Chacham is going to keep halacha and offer him bread because that's the right thing to do, then he doesn't make another bracha. If the people that are eating are not Talmud Chachamim, then he has to. So it's lav dafka, it's a machlokas. I'm Rav Papa. Bishlam the Rav Yochanan lekasha, hadik adam chashav, the lekden chashav. But fine, so put that aside. Let's go to the first line. The first line was, you're not allowed to feed a waiter, put bread into his mouth, unless he washes his hands. So you see that there's an obligation to wash your hands. When you're feeding someone, the one who's eating has to wash his hands. So the Gemara says, Lav dafka, shani shamish titarid. It could be generally you don't have to, but it's dafka, a waiter has to. Why? Because a waiter is so busy in the meal that we're afraid he'll get distracted, he won't be vigilant. Maybe normally when a person is, focused, like I won't touch the bread, fine, but a waiter's all over the place, so he has to wash his hands. But Tan Rabbanon, the truth is, the Gemara doesn't relate this as a proof, but it is a proof. L'yitin adam prus l'shamish, you're not allowed to feed a waiter. Bein shakos biyadai, in general, you're not allowed to feed a waiter. Bein shakos biyadai, whether the cup is in the waiter's hand, bein shakos biyad shel balabayis. Shamiyar davar kalkala besuda. Meaning, when someone is drinking, you're not allowed to feed the waiter. The reason being is because, let's say the host is drinking, and he sees you feed the waiter while he's drinking, and maybe he doesn't want the waiter to eat, because he's like, he's supposed to be working, and he's going to start trying to object and choke. So don't feed the waiter while people are drinking. Okay. But then the Brisa says, you're not allowed to put bread into the shamish's mouth unless he washes his hands first. Okay, so it's not a riot because we already talked about this. Okay, fine. So we've already proven, we've discussed, we didn't have a conclusion about whether the person who's feeding whether the eater has to wash his hands. What about the feeder, the one who's feeding the waiter, the one who's feeding the other person? Does he have to wash his hands? So Tashima, the Tani de Menashe, Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Isha madicha es yada achas b'mayim v'nesenes pas levna katan. On Yom Kippur, although you're not allowed to wash your hands, a woman who's feeding her child has to wash the hands that she's feeding. If she's only using one hand, she washes one hand and feeds. But stop right here. It seems to be that you have to wash your hands. Amr Lav al Shammai Hazakin. The story goes on Shammai Hazakin. He didn't want to feed his child even with one hand because he didn't want to wash his hands on Yom Kippur. Now, I guess, and it wasn't that the kid wasn't starving. I guess he had someone else do it. But the Chazal, the Rabbanon, were not happy that he was refusing to wash his hands and giving up the obligation of feeding the child to someone else. They actually instituted that he has to feed with both hands. Okay. The point is, though, you see from here that a person has to wash their hands even on Yom Kippur. Why are they washing their hands? Not because because they're feeding it. So the Gemara says no. Rabbi Shifta. Shifta, the basic understanding from most Rishonim is that this is the tumah that rests on a person when they sleep, when they wake up in the morning. I mean, when it says a woman has to wash her hand before feeding a child, it's not referring to washing because you're feeding someone bread. It's washing because you have tumah on yadayim, meaning when you wake up in the morning and there's tumah b'yadayim, you're not allowed to feed someone bread or anything because you're putting tumah on the food. That's why it's lav dafka that you have to. It's not a takana because of Netilas Yadayim for the Suda. Stam, there's a takana that when you're touching food in the morning, so don't think that because it's Yom Kippur you can get away with it. No, you got to wash that hand. So Tashima, Avu de Shmuel Ashkechel Shmuel de Kabachi. When Shmuel was a young man, his father found that Shmuel was crying. Amarle Amai Kabachas, why are you crying? He says, Demacham Rabbi, because my Rebbe hit me. So Amai, he says, well, why'd your Rebbe hit you? He says, because Shmuel said, I was feeding my Rebbe's son, and I didn't wash my hands before I met Rebbe's son, and he hit me for that. So Shmuel's father asked Shmuel, so why didn't you wash your hands? Amarle, hu achel v'anamashina. He's eating, why should I wash? Meaning, why should I wash? I'm not the one eating, I'm the feeder. So Amarle, Shmuel's father said, you're right. The truth is, someone who's feeding does not have to wash his hands. And he was unimpressed by the Rebbe. He says, Loi mistayid loy gomer. Not only does your Rebbe not know halacha, mimcha nami machi, he's hitting you for doing the right thing. So you see that someone who's feeding does not have to wash his hands. That's how we paskin, that the one who's eating has to do Netilas Yadayim even when he's being fed, but not the feeder. Eater, not the feeder. Okay, new halacha. The Mishnah says, "Sir Adam Basar Gvina Matbachas Achas." A person may wrap meat and cheese in one cloth, as long as you make sure they're not touching each other. Put something in between the meat and cheese, and it's fine. And we mentioned this last time that you're not allowed to have meat and cheese on the same table at the same time. Now that was Pasha's talking about one person. I'm eating a burger and there's dairy on the table. I have to take it away because I'm afraid that I might inadvertently eat it. The truth is that same halacha applies to two people if they're very close to each other, like a husband and wife, or brothers, or best friends, where there's a concern that they'll inadvertently eat off each other's plate. One person is not allowed to eat meat while the other person is eating milk for the same reason. But two guests staying at a hotel, one's allowed to eat meat and one's allowed to eat dairy. The reason being because we're not close enough to each other. If we were very close, it would be a problem. But we're two guests at a hotel. I don't even know who you are. You're not eating off my plate. But if you're eating off the same plate, if we're close enough that you eat off my plate, then it's not going to be a problem. So it says the Gemara, the Mishnah said that you're allowed to store milk and meat in the same cloth. But make sure they don't touch. It says Gemara, even if they touch, what's the big deal? Everything's cold. Usually, for there to be problems, there has to be a transfer of flavor, shishim, all these things. Even if they do touch each other, everything's cold. So the Gemara says, you're right. When everything's cold, there's no penetrating of flavor. You still have to rinse off because of schmutz. We don't want you to touch it because you're right. You don't need shishim if they do touch, but you'd have to rinse it off, and we're afraid you might not come to rinse. In other words, there might be schmutz on the surface. For heat is to transfer flavors to penetrate, but on surface, we're afraid of surface schmutz. So we said in the Mishnah that two guests are allowed to eat in the hotel. So I explained because they're not close to each other. So the Gemara speaks to that. This is only true when they're strangers. But if they do know each other, meaning, and they're close enough, they would eat off each other's plates, aser. Tana Miyachi, the Bryce is similarly states of Shingmali Oimer, Shnei Achsanoyim, Shenesarchu Punda Echod, Zebomin Atzav, Zebomin Adarim, Zebom Echatichasai, Zebog Giviasai, Oichon Shulchan Echod, Zebosiv Zagvin of Eichoshishin. Meaning, when two people, random guests, he comes from the north, he comes from the south, they can eat on the same table. But says the Bryce and added Chiddush, even by two people that are very, very close, Lo Osru El Betfisa Achas. Even two people are close, they're eating on the same table, it's only aser, but tfisa achas. Tfisa achas means when they're together. Now what the Gemara is going to explain what this means is, even by two people, very, very close, it's only aser when they're eating mamish together. What do you mean together? They're on the same table. It means there's nothing on the table other than their food. This is the concept of a hecker, that when you have two people that are very, very close, they're allowed to eat on the same table milk and meat as long as there's something on the table to remind them, something not normally there. So let's say they didn't have bottles of water on the table. So you put the bottle of water on the table, between them, that's enough. Or placemats, or you're eating on the tablecloth, I'm eating directly on the table. That's what it means. So it says the Gemara, doesn't mean they have to mamish be on together for it to be a problem. It means as long as there's nothing else on the table, there's no hecker on the table, that's when it's a problem. But if there's a hecker, then it's mutter. What if you have two brothers? So that's a problem. Milk and meat, because they would eat off each other's plate, but they're currently in a big fight. So the question is, basically, do we say like this? Because they're currently fighting, they're not going to eat off each other's plate, then it's fine? Or do you say that even though they're currently fighting, Chazal just aser in all situations by two brothers because people don't know. It's like Marisayan. People are not going to know that they're currently fighting. So Amar Le, Yoimur Kol Sarikin Asurin, Bisriki Baitus Mutarim. This was the people used to say this, that this had to do with whatever. It has to do with when they would make matzah. You're not allowed to stamp the matzah because it could lead to the dough rising. But even if a type of stamp where it's technically mutter, people would say all the stamps are aser, but that stamp is mutter. In other words, you can't have two brothers. Generally, it's aser, but those two, because they're fighting, it's mutter. Chazal don't work like this. Marisayan, people are not going to know. Therefore, it has to just be across the board. Yeah. It's a different halach from Marshal, but I don't know how he does the Gemara. Anyway, Vul Tamech says the Gemara way. If you're so worried about optics, we know you're not allowed to do laundry at Chol Moed. But if all you have is one shirt, you're allowed to wash the one shirt in Chol Moed. But why? Why don't you worry about the same thing? You should say, people are not going to know. They're just going to see me doing laundry. Why aren't you saying it should be usher because of Marisayan across the board? So the Gemara says, Hasam ha'amar rav, amar barav, ezuroi mechiach. That's different. Apparently they would have a belt on their shirt. If you had multiple shirts and you're doing laundry, you would take your belt and put it on the other shirt that you're going to wear. If you leave the belt on while you're doing laundry, that means it's all you have. In other words, people will be able to see he's doing laundry without a shirt on. So that's clear. But over here, if they see two brothers eating, they're not going to know that they're fighting, not fighting, and therefore is more of a concern of Maris Ayin. I will stop here.